Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development program, and in particular, the AWD 1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class, I'm preparing a series of video presentations based on the textbook that will be used for the class in the fall 2019 semester. The book is shown on screen right now. It is Pro ASP.NET MVC 5 in 8-press text by Mr. Adam Freeman. And we are working our way through Chapter 18. I'm on the bottom half of page 497, combining authentication and authorization filters. And the author mentions here, you can combine these two filters in the same action method to narrow the scope of the security policy. The MVC framework will call the on-authentication method of the authentication filter, just as in the previous example, then move on to run the authorization filter. So if we look down here, we now have this. So again, if we quickly look and see how that has changed, we had this, Google Auth, but now we've added this line right here. Now I've already got the Google Auth, so I don't need it twice. So the authorized filter that you see right there restricts access to the bob@google.com account. If the action method is targeted by another Google account, all right, the authentication filter on authentication challenge will be passed, and authentication challenge context object, whose result property is set to an instance of the HTTP unauthorized result class. These filters in our home controller are going to restrict access to the index method to the user admin who is authenticated using the account controller. All right. Again, the whole idea behind this kind of thing is you only want people who are authorized, who have been authenticated and authorized to be able to look at, whatever part of the website or whatever it is you want them to look at. The MVC framework calls the on-authentication challenge method one final time after the action method has been executed, but before the action result is returned and executed. This provides the opportunity to respond to the fact that the action has been completed. All right? So especially if something possibly went wrong. It is for this reason that we check the result property of the authentication challenger context object of the on-authentication challenge method. So you have to go back into our Google Auth attribute.cs file. First, come up here and add an additional using statement. And then come down to the bottom here, we've got this if inside of our authentication challenge, but we will add an else here. Which will say forms authentication dot sign out. So they say then let's go in there and test this, so let's do a save all. We'll come through here by starting the application. Now, once we start it, we're going to come in here and we're going to request the /home, /home/list, okay, And what they want is us to authenticate as bob@google.com. Now we've got in here user and secret. All right, you see it doesn't work. Now, no idea if we try bob@gmail.com and secret, still doesn't like it. All right, next, and I am on the top part of page 499. The author talks about exception filters. Notice they're run only if an unhandled exception has been thrown when invoking a method. As it says, it can come from the following locations: another kind of filter, the action method itself, or when the action is executed. So exception filters implement the iException filter interface shown right here. This onException method that you see inside of the interface, as they say, is called when an unhandled exception arises. The parameter that's sent to it is an exception context object derived from the controller object, which has got several useful features, some of which are shown on the bottom of 499. In addition to the properties inherited from the controller context class, the exception context class defines additional properties that are shown in table 18.7, which is on the top of page 500. The exception that's been thrown is available through the exception property. An exception filter can report that it has handled the exception by setting the exception handle property to true. All of the exception filters applied to an action are invoked, even if this property has been set to true, so it's a good idea to check whether another filter has already dealt with the problem. The result property is mentioned towards the bottom half of the page, is used by the exception filter to tell MVC what to do. The two main uses are to log the exception and to display an associated message. To demonstrate how this all fits together, the authors created a new class called rangeExceptionAttribute.cs in the infrastructure folder with the contents that are shown here. The exception filter handles an argument out of range exception by redirecting the user's browser to a file called rangeerrorpage.html in the current folder. As far as actually applying the exception filter, as shown here on page 501, the author says we need to do some groundwork before we can test the exception. First, we need to create a content folder in the example project and create the rangeerrorpage.html within it. So, again, first thing we need to do is to create a content folder. Then inside of there, we want to come in and right mouse click and choose Add New Item. And we went through this before, but I want to add an HTML file, which I believe was general. Should have paid more attention when I did it before. Just take it from the top. It's not there. It's not there. It's not there. Or there. Or there. Or there. Or there. Well, I did it before, so I know it's got to be here. Search.html. Of course, no items found. HTML page, thank you. Oh, range error page.html. All right, so we want to take that, remove the code that's in there, replace it with the code that is shown on page 501. All right, then come back in here. Next, we need to add an action method to the home controller, which will throw an exception we want to demonstrate. So right down at the bottom, we'll put this in. All right. So we put in the code on 501 and 502. You can see the default exception handling if you start the application. So let's do a file, save all. We'll start the application, and we will navigate out to home range test 50 URL. Home range test 50 URL. The default routing that Visual Studio creates for an MVC project has a segment variable called ID, which will be set to 50 for this URL, triggering the response shown in figure 18.3. See chapters 15 and 16 for more details. Well, it's thinking about it, but ideally what's going to happen is this. Well, it's still spinning, which is never a good thing. Well, I got a segment out of range exception, not the exact same one they had in the book, but the author says, let's do this and then we will. In fact, let's stop right here. We'll pick it up in the next lesson.